The House has resumed. Members, the House is debating the second reading of the Vulnerable Children Bill, and the House rose for the dinner adjournment as Senator Lole-Taylor had the call. She has 9.5 minutes approximately remaining. As Senator Lole-Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying before we broke up for tea, is that this bill needs to be debated with caution. And New Zealand First actually voted against the Select Committee report because there were areas in the bill that needed to be fixed, or there are areas in the bill that need to be fixed. The loopholes create discrepancies for those that this bill is meant to care for. The report presented an atmosphere of false hope, using specific words to sell this government's idea of a solution without true commitment. And that's been a major concern. Sweet phrases are being used to win support for this bill with the hope that no one will take the time to look into its contents properly. Language is now becoming the art of window dressing that intentionally creates confusion and forcing false perspectives on ordinary people. This tactic, Mr. Speaker, is clearly received by many who do care about vulnerable children. They do care about our children, and those who have responded through submissions because they are concerned about their loved ones being victimised unfairly. Our children are precious, there's no secret about that, and they ought to be given fair opportunity in life. They need love, they need safety, they need access to an environment that cares for their future. They must be provided with stability that comes with fairness and fosters a balanced approach to life. The truth is, greed is now replacing common sense and love. Love will come when greed and manipulation stops. Love will come when personal agenda is put aside and there is focus on positive outcomes for all. The evidence of child abuse in New Zealand is tragic, absolutely tragic. The New Zealand's records of child abuse is concerning. Children are being neglected and ignored. It is a real shame to think that child poverty is actually encouraged here in New Zealand. It is disheartening to have a parliament that introduces a legislation, which would result in demolishing any good efforts to enhance a happy environment for our children. We heard of the saying that when we were children, we used to think that when we grow up, we would no longer be vulnerable. The unfortunate reality now is that to grow up is to accept vulnerability. The term vulnerable children is a relatively new term. The fact is, one of the virtues of being a child is vulnerability. But children are expected to gain more security and independence as they grow older. Sadly, harmful, negative and threatening influences today, such as drugs, alcohol, domestic and sexual abuse, mean that some children never get that chance, never. These negative influences perpetuate the vulnerability of children. It is our responsibility to ensure that our children can grow up to become confident young adults. The Kahui twins did not have to die if the loopholes in the New Zealand legislations were afforded common sense. The number of young children being subjected to unsafe environments increased over the last 6 years, or the last few years, if I could say that way. It is a demoralising outcome for a country like New Zealand, who often raise human rights concerns at international forums. Young baby Nia Classy, I'm sure that everyone will remember her, wouldn't have died if our government applied intelligence that would put the safety of our children as a top priority. The words being used as the title of this bill sound great to our ears. While the title flows perfectly, it is very hard for anyone to oppose something that aims to provide safe haven for our young children. One of the positive aspects of this bill is the area where information sharing amongst government agencies will ensure early detection of vulnerable children. One would hope that it doesn't get to the wrong hands, who would then use to blackmail those who are already vulnerable. This area is meant to raise any alarm that could potentially lead to risks, vulnerability of children, and accounts for appropriate actions that would be needed to address the issues. It is meant to put the children at the centre of everything that may need to be done. But the bill fails to recognise other elements that can create difficulties for our children. This is the area where the attempt to protect our vulnerable children would be seen as pure manipulation, and those with power will behave dastardly, ignoring the need for the children to be at the centre of any efforts. Nothing brings me more happiness than trying to help the most vulnerable people in our New Zealand society. However, introducing legislation for political point scoring is dangerous and will have a huge negative impact on our community. I asked the question at the Select Committee about security checks on volunteers who are engaged on a regular basis with children. To my surprise, the response I was given was that some religious groups are not comfortable with this because it could put people off from volunteering for schools, ECE, or whatever organisation it may be. I immediately thought of my mother, Whiao Leono, who often said, "We are never so vulnerable than when we trust someone." But paradoxically, if we cannot trust, neither can we find love or joy. If those who offer themselves to volunteer are actually genuine about the service that they provide for young children, they cannot possibly be concerned about security checks. In fact, they would probably support it all the way. And it means that it will be getting rid of the risk and harms that are associated with those who do work with our young children. A number of child abuse incidents occurred as a result of these types of situations where volunteers' background are not checked and children have been found to have been abused. I tried to introduce a bill in the House called Sentencing Protection of Children from Criminal Offending, and this bill has been reported back to the House. Again, it was a bill that would have deterred criminals from committing crimes in the presence of the young children. Some of those at the Select Committee thought that it's already covered under the current legislation when it is clearly not. It is down to the judge to give that option. So let me see this. If this was the case, if it was already covered, then why are we deliberating this bill here today? To think that the current law allows the judges to consider options that incorporate additional punishment is clearly not black and white. It is possible that this current government are working against a common sense approach because it is under the name of New Zealand First Party without any regard for the children. And if current legislations are sufficient to cover the basic requirements for vulnerable children, then why have there been so many cases where vulnerable children continue to be affected? We have a responsibility as a state to protect our most vulnerable citizens. That means children, of course, including seniors and disability. The question is, will this bill be enough? Will this bill deliver that outcome? We all accept the general expectations that vulnerable children need safeguards from those who would cause harm to them. Well, that is our moral obligations. It is our obligations to ensure that we support changes that will bring about better outcomes. In fact, it is our obligation as parliamentarians that we introduce legislation which deliver justifiable results, including peace and happiness for our tamaiti. There is a wider cost to society when children are deprived of basic needs crucial to their development. And if we can't protect the future generations, there will be economic cost to the country as well. New Zealand First will put forward an SOP at the committee stage for the members to consider, and we urge the Minister and the Government to seriously give it some consideration. Thank you very much.
Speaker.
Tim McIndoe.
Mr. Speaker, every so often, as members of Parliament